Hello. It's so good to be with each of you in this method. So good to think about studying the Bible. I want to read a quotation from John Wesley. I have thought I am a creature of a day, passing through life as an arrow shot through the air. I am a spirit come from God and returning to God, just hovering over the great gulf, till a few moments hence I am no more seen. I drop into an unchangeable eternity. I want to know one thing, the way to heaven, how to land safe on that happy shore. God himself has condescended to teach the way. For this very end, he came down from heaven. He has written it down in a book. Oh, give me that book. Think of it. Here, in this volume, are all we need to know to live gloriously and happily and finally eternally. Oh, this is not all we need to know. God has given us brains. He's given us a great cosmos to study. But here are the basics. Here. Oh, give me that book. And so I congratulate you that you've chosen to spend time with the Bible and with me. Thank you. In this course, we're going to try to illustrate the method known as inductive Bible study. There are two approaches to learning. One is called deductive. In deductive learning, you start with the principles and move to the data. So, for instance, in English, to pluralize a word, you add S. Therefore, I find a word in English and it ends with S, and I say, that's a plural. Well, maybe, because there are several ways to make plurals, and all words that end with S aren't necessarily plurals. So you can see the problem with deduction. When we start with the principle, it's very easy to force the data to agree with the principle. The other approach is inductive learning. Induction moves from the data to the principles. We start out with the information there, and we decide, this is Hebrew, and it's pretty clear that these words are plural. And they end with im. Is it possible, principle, that in Hebrew, one of the ways of making plural is adding an im? Yes. So induction begins with the data. Diverse data, complicated data. It's not an easy process. Interestingly, this is essentially what the scientific method is. You begin by looking at the data and trying to make sense of that data. So, inductive Bible study is not, first of all, reading a theology text. It's first of all reading the biblical text. Now, again, of course, we want to study theology at some point in our study, but possibly we'll want to study it to see how it fits with our conclusions from our inductive study. We're not going to correct the Bible on the basis of our theology. We're going to correct theology on the basis of the Bible. So in this course, we're going to look at the book of Genesis, and I'm going to try to illustrate for you the process of induction as we go along. Now you'll notice that there are lessons printed for you in the material, printed I say, but on your text, in the app, online. And if you'll do these lessons before I get to the material, it'll help you greatly in understanding what I'm doing and why I'm trying to do it. So I'll try to refer as we go through. Your very first lesson is a survey of the book of Genesis, and we'll be doing that in the next session of our course. But for now, let's talk about this inductive process. There are three major steps to be taken. The first is in some ways the most important, the process of observation. You cannot interpret what you didn't see. You cannot discover what's there if you never saw it in the first place. There's a wonderful story of the great naturalist Louis Agassiz. Someone has said, what's a college? It's a log with Louis Agassiz on one end and a student on the other end. In this case, a student was accepted to study with Professor Agassiz. And so he came to the laboratory where Dr. Agassiz was and rather tentatively came in, and Agassiz said, "Who are you?" And he said, I'm so-and-so, and gave his name. I'm your new student. Oh, all right. And he went over to a cabinet and pulled out a dish in which there was a fish, evidently in formaldehyde, the way it smelled. And he said, "Here, study it." Study it? Yes, look at it. Come back when you've seen it. So the student took the dish and went out and spent an afternoon. I guess he had said, "No, you can't touch it. You can turn it over, but otherwise, no." So later in the afternoon, he came back. And Agassiz said, "Who are you?" And the student said, I'm so-and-so, and I've been studying the fish." "What? No, you haven't seen the fish. Go away and do not come back until you've seen the fish." So the student was on his mettle, and he went away and spent 2 days jotting down things about the fish. And at the end of 2 days, he came back, and Agassiz recognized him this time. And he said, "What have you seen?" And so the student began to tell him, "You've not seen that fish. Go away. Do not come back until you've seen it." So this time, the student spent more than a week. And when he came back, Agassiz said, "All right, you've begun to see it. Now cut it open and tell me what you see. Do not come back until you have seen it." Seeing, that's the process where we look at everything. I'm presently teaching an adult Bible class, and one of the things that I say to students again and again, if it's there on purpose. So look and see what you can see. The second step is analysis. Here you are asking questions about what you have seen. And typically there are 3 questions. The 3 questions are, first of all, the question of definition. What exactly is it that I have seen? Suppose you have seen a cause and effect relationship. Because you have sinned, therefore you will go into captivity. Cause, sin, effect, captivity. Now the definition question is, what is sin? What is the cause here? And what is the effect? What is exile? What does that mean? The next question that you want to ask is the question of rational. The definition question is what? And the rational question is why? We're talking about the analysis stage here. What is it that I've seen? Why? Why does sin result in exile? It could result in something else, couldn't it? What's going on that this cause produces that effect? Why does this cause produce this effect? Why is this effect the result of that cause? Finally, you want to ask implication questions. This is now the so what question. What does that cause and effect relationship imply? This is where you're moving out now to principle. Sin has real effects. Sin results in alienation. Sin, and so you go. And the implications are immense. So observation, seeing. What is here? For instance, going back for a moment to observation, the Lord appeared to Abraham. It's very easy to gloss right over that and say, well, the point is, what is the point? What is the sense of appearing there? Now, we can't always answer our questions, but you will surely not answer them if you don't ask them. And so here again is a very intentional, sometimes rather boring approach. Well, it's obvious. Is it? Is it? The first phase of analysis is interpretation. That's what we've just been looking at. The second phase of analysis is investigation. Now you may want to look at grammatical questions. You may want to look at genre questions. Now, I always laugh a bit with my students. Genre. What is that? Well, first of all, it's a French word. And if you're going to look educated, you've got to use foreign words. What it means is type of literature. That's all that it means. So, is this poetry? That will have an effect on how we interpret. Is it narrative? Is it discourse? So, one phase of investigation may be literary, grammatical. Another may be type of literature. And a third will be historical. The great classical questions of interpretation are, what does it say? Grammatical, literary. What did it say? In that time and space, as best as we can determine, what did this kind of statement mean? Very often it will not mean exactly what we might mean today. So investigation. I want to say, though, as firmly as I can, don't do that until you've dealt with the interpretive questions. Otherwise, again, you'll go deductive and you'll apply certain principles and say, well, it has to mean that. No. Ask, first of all, what does it mean? And then investigate. The third step, observation, analysis, synthesis. Now you're putting it back together. You've said, I think this data means this. I think this data implies this. I think this is where it's all going. Now you want to test your findings. And it's in the phase of synthesis First of all, correlation. You want to look at the rest of that book? Does the rest of the book say something about this material that I've just been interpreting? The rest of the section, Pentateuch? What do the rest of the books of the Pentateuch suggest about this? The Testament? The Bible? Correlation. Typically, you'll have agreement, disagreement, or nothing said about it. But there's the question that you're asking of correlation. Then evaluation. What is the meaning of this material for us today? That's the third question. What does it say? What did it say? What does it say today? Evaluation. Does the New Testament, for instance, do away with sacrifice? Then what is the significance of this material for me today? Is it just gone? Or is there something in this teaching that has spiritual significance for me today? Evaluation. And finally, application. Correlation, evaluation, and application. Now, in all of this, there is one overarching principle that you must not overlook. That is the principle of context. When I first began to read the Bible, I was using a King James Version. When I went off to college, my parents gave me a new Bible, and it happened to be in the Revised Standard Version. As I was reading it, I was just stunned by how much easier it was to comprehend the RSV. And I thought, well, it's not that different. Got rid of the hasts and the wouldsts and the shoulds and the arts. And then it dawned on me. My RSV was paragraphed. And for the first time, I was not reading sentence by sentence by sentence by sentence. I was reading the sentences in their context. It is said that the word for realtors is location, location, location. The word for Bible study is context, context, context. Now, why is that? When I began to talk about that, people said, well, Paul didn't write in paragraphs. No, he didn't use spacing and indentation. But guess what? He thought in paragraphs. He thought in connected thoughts together. And so it is with the whole Bible. I've thought, I've reflected on why that is so, and I've come to the conclusion that context is so significant for biblical study because our God is into relationships. As he in his own being is a triform relationship, so it is with his desire for us. He wants to be in relationship with us. Does he want to save our souls from the impact and power of sin? Absolutely. But beyond that, he wants to walk with us. I've spent a fair part of my life in Bible translation, and metaphors are very significant. Where we use a figure of speech to convey an idea. Walk is like that. Are we going to physically walk with God? No. But when you try to explain metaphors, almost always something is lost. So, for instance, what would be an explanation for walk? Live? God wants us to live with him? Well, that's true. But it misses some of the power of the process of walking, of the nature of the relationship that we experience in walking. Well, that's free. God is into relationships, and therefore the Bible is contextual. From start to finish, it is contextual. The ideas fit together in larger and larger and larger segments. So, in observation, the very first principle is work from the larger units to the smaller ones. If you start with the smaller ones, if you start with words, for instance, you may totally misunderstand how those words are put together in the sentence. And so it goes right up to the top, so that we're going to begin in Genesis with a survey of the book. Now you say, oh my goodness, that's a big, big book. Yes, it is. I'm not talking about reading it, but in preparation for our next session, I want you to scan the book. This is what's covered in our first lesson. Just as quickly as you can, move through it. What's the thrust of this book? Because that's going to shape your understanding of the divisions in the book. And that's going to shape your understanding of the subdivisions. And that's going to shape your understanding of the sections. Often sections are equivalent to chapters. Not always, though. You've got to be careful there. And the shape and the content of the section is going to shape the paragraph, and the paragraph the sentence, and the sentence the word. Start with the larger unit. Ideally, you're going to start with the Testament or the Bible, but for our purposes, we're going to work with a book. As you're doing that, just jot down observations. They don't have to be organized. They don't have to be, well, this is the most important. Just jot them down. Then when you finish doing that, then go back and look at your list and say, I think these 5 or 6 are the most worthy of pursuing further. Having done that, then look for major divisions and subdivisions. And you can stop there in terms of your study. But that's what we're doing. We're looking at context and allowing context to shape what we're doing. Then observe words. Now there's a sense in which you're starting back up the scale. Observe, as I've said, genre, type of literature. Then be alert for what we can call strategic areas. Are there blocks of material that seem to be especially important for what's around them, especially what follows them. Again, you say, well, that's pretty subjective. Yes, it is. On the other hand, I think as you continue in your study, you'll discover this is not so hard. These blocks, think, for instance, of Isaiah chapter 6. That's an incredibly strategic area for really the book as a whole. But again, or think, again, Isaiah, that's where I've spent a lot of my life. Chapter 40. Again, condensed, focused, impactful. Then be alert to atmosphere. Is the material just sort of straightforward narrative? And then does something critical happen? Think of Mount Carmel in the Elijah narrative. The atmosphere there is charged. Ahab meets him and says, "Is it you, O troubler of Israel?" And Elijah says, "I'm not the troubler of Israel, you are." And we're set up for what's going to happen there. So observation, context, observe key terms, genre, type of literature, strategic areas, atmosphere. Finally, observe structure. And this is really down to the core of what inductive study is about. Structure is a reflection of relationships. What is the relationship of the material in this book? What is the relationship of the material in this paragraph? What's the relationship of the material in this sentence? And in the remainder of this period, I want to talk with you about types of relationships. As I have been involved in inductive study most of my life, this is the thing that again and again I have felt has yielded wonderful results. We've already talked about one type of relationship, cause and effect. But let's look at others here. I'll say more about that one in just a moment. Types of relationship. First of all, association, where ideas are associated with each other, connected to each other. One of those is comparison. Think about Psalm 1. He is like a tree. The righteous person is associated with treedom. Now, you're perhaps already thinking about interpretation. What is being compared? A human and a tree? Why are these compared, this righteous human and a tree? What is it that is comparable in those, and so forth? But that's already into interpretation. The other type of association is the opposite, contrast. He does not walk or stand or sit, but his delight is in the law of the Lord. What's being contrasted here? And I would suggest, again, you see what I'm doing, I'm already verging into interpretation, but what's being contrasted is two types of life guidance. The sinner, the wicked, the scoffer, the mocker. Is that where you're going to get your life guidance? Or are you going to get your life guidance from the book association, comparison, contrast. Second main law of relationship is recurrence, happening again. Once again, those can be subdivided. One type of recurrence is repetition. If something is repeated, you know that is important to the speaker or the writer. Here, we're talking about the recurrence of the very same terms. So, for instance, in Malachi chapter 2, covenant is repeated 9 times. Do you think God might be trying to make a point? Yes, yes. So that's repetition, where the very same terms or the very same phrases are being repeated again and again. I've been fascinated through the years with, in the New Living Translation, we translate it unfailing love and faithfulness. 2 Hebrew words. I won't bother you with those right now. But phrase that gets repeated. So that's repetition is one type of recurrence. The second type of recurrence is called continuity. That is the repetition, the recurrence of similar ideas. Not necessarily the same word, but the same thought is being expressed in a variety of words again and again. That's continuity, and we'll need to be very careful with that term, and I'll tell you why in just a moment. Association, recurrence. And here is the next one, continuation. Through the years, students have had a hard time distinguishing continuity from continuation. Continuity is essentially on the same level. The ideas, there's no development, whereas continuation is you're starting at point 1, you're going from there to point 2, from there to point 3, from there to point 4. Another term that sometimes I've used to try to help students avoid the confusion is development. Continuation equals development. Idea 1 leads to idea 2, leads to idea 3, so that when you end, you're not where you started. With continuity, you are where you started. A recurrence of similar ideas. But continuation is development, where we're moving through and we're not ending where we started. A fourth type of relationship is climax, where we move often through continuation, through a climactic point. Continuation can end with no particular bang, or it can end with climax, where, for instance, the book of Exodus is structured by climax, where we start out with the people using their hands for Pharaoh, and in the end, they use them for the Lord, and the climax is the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Climactic. Climactic. A fifth type is somewhat difficult to convey sometimes. This is pivot or cruciality. Cruciality is the term that Robert Traina, who was in many ways in the 20th century the guru of inductive Bible study, And he used the term cruciality, but oftentimes that has been difficult for people to grasp. He's talking about crux. Crux is a crossroads. You've come in a certain direction, let's say this direction, and you come to this point and you change direction. Unfortunately, in modern English, crucial just means important. It doesn't mean crossroads. And so Traina suggested pivot, and most of his students have picked up on it. It's a turning point. Something has happened. I believe that's what you have in Isaiah chapters 36 to 39. We've been talking about whether or not God is trustworthy. And we've finally ascertained through Hezekiah, yes, God can be trusted, and if he's trusted, he will deliver. On the other hand, that section, 36 to 39, ends very oddly, with Hezekiah showing off his wealth and armaments to the Babylonians. And I think there's some wry humor there. Isaiah shows up and says, well, what did you show them? And Hezekiah sort of blazons it out and says, I showed them everything. And Isaiah says, well, that's good, because they're going to own it all one day. Oops. What happened? What happens is Hezekiah is not the promised Messiah from chapter 11. We're going to have to look somewhere else. We're going to have to go in a different direction for the one who is the Messiah to come. So I would argue that the relationship between chapters 1 to 35 and chapters 40 to 66 is a relationship of pivot. And the pivotal segment is chapters 36 to 39. Interchange, where you go from A to B, back to A, and back to B. A, B, A, B. You are interchanging ideas. You see this especially again in Isaiah in the introductory chapters 1 to 5. You start out in chapter 1 with this interchange between a rebellious Isaiah and a rebellious Israel and a clean Israel. Rebellious, clean. Rebellious, clean. And you end on a note of rebellion in chapter 1. Then in chapter 2, no transition. All the nations are going to come to the house of the Lord to learn his Torah. What? And then just as suddenly, you go back to a picture of rebellious Israel. And then in chapter 4, verses 2 through 6, an Israel that is clean and holy and pure. And then, just as suddenly, in chapter 5, Israel as a vineyard of bitter grapes. Interchange. A, B, A, B, A. Particularization, generalization. And this can go both ways. You can do a general statement and then particularize it. O Israel, serve the Lord. Serve him with gladness. Serve him with praise. Serve him with obedience. Serve him with joy. General statement, serve the Lord. Then particulars, how we do that. Or you can do it the other way. You can start with particulars and then generalize it in the end. In some ways, that's the way the book of Ephesians operates, with the armor of the Lord being sort of the final generalization of this walk with him that's been developed through the preceding chapters. Particularization, generalization. Explanation or analysis, where again, you typically at the end of a sequence, you explain, now what was that about? Then the one we've already talked about, cause and effect. I have been fascinated in my study of the Bible over the years by how frequently cause and effect appears in the Bible. You say, well, sure. I'm not sure. Because in paganism, you're not sure why anything has happened. Because the true effectualization occurs in the invisible world. Who knows why you have a stomach ache? Yes, you ate green apples yesterday, but it may be that the stomach ache God is upset with you. You don't know. But in the Bible, and again, I'm tempted to get off topic here. In the Bible, here is a real world. And our choices here have real effects. It's not Never Never Land. It's you chose to live this way, and therefore here are the effects. Why are you going into exile? Well, because Babylon is too strong. No. Because you sinned. Oh my goodness. So be alert for those cause and effect relationships, and I think you'll find again and again that recognizing it and thinking about it can pay great dividends. Now again, as with recurrence, this can work two ways. You can start out with the cause. Because you sinned, therefore you went into exile. That's causation. Or substantiation, where you reverse the two. You will go into exile because you have sinned. Causation, cause, effect. Substantiation, effect, cause. And sometimes that difference is significant. Why have we stated the effect first? It may be not significant, or it may turn out to be quite significant. Causation, substantiation, two illustrations of the law of cause and effect. Instrumentation. You will be taken into exile by Babylon. Babylon is the instrument or the agent by which this action will be performed. Problem solution. This is also in various sources called interrogation, which would be question answer. We're going to see this in our study of Genesis. A problem is stated and a solution is found. In a broad sense, this is the relationship of the Old Testament and the New Testament. The Old Testament is defining the problem. The problem is we are alienated from God. Our sin has cut us off from Him. The problem is not hell. Very little discussion of hell in the Old Testament. The problem is we're cut off from life. Death has intervened and alienated us from the source of our life. What's the solution? God stepping into time and space, taking our death and giving us life forevermore. problem solution or interrogation. Introduction. This can be a little bit like explanation. Explanation typically comes at the end. Preparation at the beginning. In some way or another, we're set up for what follows. Finally, conclusion or summary. Now, sometimes the conclusion is simply the wrap-up. Sometimes there's an intentional kind of, oh yeah, we're restating the points that have been made earlier. So these are the laws of relationship. We call them laws. Again, it's sort of like the laws of nature. We're simply observing how things work. And this, in the process of observation, this is very, very significant. How are these materials being related to one another? In these ways, then, we're going to be looking at the book of Genesis. We're going to be observing, we're going to be analyzing, we're going to be synthesizing as we try to understand how does this book work? What is it saying? And finally, most significantly, what does it mean for us? That's a very, very rapid introduction to induction. And I'm sorry that those of you seeing this on the internet are not able to ask questions, but we have some folks here in the studio who perhaps would like to ask questions as we close.
Do you any kind of there's a lot of information that you just covered. Do you encourage people to have a list of all these relationships where you can be looking at them and something like that?
The question was, I've given a lot of information here. Do I encourage people to have a list, especially of these relationships? Absolutely. Yes. I think as you're listening to this, I hope you're jotting these down, and as you're observing, oh, that's what's happening. So you got sort of a roadmap there. So absolutely, do that.
And we'll put that list so they can download it too.
All right. The list will be downloaded for you, so it'll be there at hand. Good. Other questions?
So you talked about getting an overview first and then working from larger to smaller. How do you get that overview, and how much time do you take working on that part of the process?
Yes, the question is, I talked about working from the larger to the smaller, and the question is, how much time do you spend on that process? And I'm going to say, as little as you can. It's very easy when we're surveying books to get bogged down. Oh my, look at this here. Then we read the whole, no, you mustn't do that. The whole idea is to get this telescopic perspective. Most people, I find, that never occurs to them, even with New Testament books, like, say, the book of Mark, which can be read in about an hour. People don't do it. So, yes, as little time as possible, but just looking back at it. Oh, look here. Oh, look here. In the story of Joseph, here's this oddball chapter 38 about Judah. What? That's interesting. Jot it down. Chapter 38 doesn't seem to fit with the rest. Go on. So, yes, use as little time as possible and skim it. Skim it. Trying to see how parts fit.
Yeah, just to see if you notice anything.
Yes.
Initially.
Yes.
That
Yes.
that catches your attention.
Yes. In the big picture. Now again, I'm gonna telegraph something for you as you get ready for the next lesson. Chapters 1 to 11 of Genesis are very general, and then chapters 12 through 50 are very specific. Wonder what's going on there. Yes, yes, thank you. Anything else?
As you move from the bigger to the smaller, do you encourage people to write out these passages and as you try to drill into these different concepts?
As you look at the larger sections, do I encourage people to write down what you're seeing? Absolutely, absolutely. And again, the danger is that you get too complex. You want to write long sentences. And no, just quickly jot it down, because if you don't, you'll forget it. And again, don't try to evaluate the things that you're seeing. Oh, that's important. Put a star on that one. No, get the whole list first and then go back and evaluate.